New York Times with a story about what is happening in the fight against the PKK terrorists in Turkey. Now, the Turkish government doesn't allow much press into the area at all. You're about to see why. They like to frame it as, we're just fighting the terrorists, that's all. And everybody we kill, of course, is a no-good terrorist. Civilians, no, of course we're not harming civilians. Now, they've rolled tanks and are firing into their own cities. There's some chance they're killing civilians. So let's go to the New York Times. Over the past week, Turkish tanks and artillery have pounded Kurdish targets across several southeast cities, killing at least 200 militants and more than 150 civilians, according to human rights groups and local officials. So if you're not familiar with the area, let me explain. There are Kurds in Iraq, there are Kurds in Syria, but there are also a lot of Kurds within Turkey. Now, I know there's a lot of cross-border fighting in the area, but this is all within the country of Turkey. There are a lot of Kurds there. They're rolling into some towns and saying, okay, there's PKK terrorists there. And there are some PKK terrorists there. So instead of trying to figure out who's who, they're rolling in tanks and firing into buildings. If you do that, obviously you're going to kill a lot of civilians. Now, people get mad when other countries do this. You should also get mad if Turkey does it. Plenty of people are perfectly mad at, happy to be mad at Turkey, but I'm looking for consistency throughout here. So New York Times continues to explain, several Turkish cities are under tight lockdown, and many residents have been trapped without food or electricity as clashes between Kurdish militants and Turkish security forces have intensified. So it's not just the civilians being killed, but there are people trapped there. They can't get out. You got the artillery, you got the tanks. And so it is affecting a broad swath of civilians there. Now, when you go to the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he says, well, basically they had it coming, but let me give you direct quotes. He says, our security forces will continue this fight until it has been completely cleansed and a peaceful atmosphere established. Now, that word cleansed, not a good word to use in that context. If you want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, it sounds different in Turkish, okay, well, let's go to the next quote and see if it sounds any different in this quote. He says, quote, you will be annihilated in those houses, those buildings, those ditches which you have dug. Okay. Now, I know if you ask his supporters, they'll say, no, he means the terrorists will be annihilated. But it's in the houses of the city, Turkish city. You shouldn't fire into your own citizens. Is it easy to go rout out the terrorists in between the civilians? No, it's not easy. No, but this is what we yell at America over. This is what we yell at Israel over. This is what we yell at Saudi Arabia over when they do it in Yemen. And this is within your own country, when you're firing at your own citizens. So it's not easy, but you got to do the hard task of separating out and figuring out who the terrorists are and who the civilians are. Now, look, in the past, when Erdogan was not in power, Turkey has done this in some good ways and some bad ways. Like when they were fighting Kurdish terrorists in the 1990s, did they do some of this? Undoubtedly. At the same time, they invested a great deal of money into southeastern Turkey. They created jobs, they created opportunity that gave an incentive for Kurdish citizens to go, hey, civilians to go, hey, you know what? I'm also a Turkish citizen, which they are by law. And there's a lot of Kurdish politicians in the Turkish parliament. And it gave them a reason to be proud to be Turkish. But when you roll in the tanks and you don't give the other side of it, what are you going to do? You're going to turn the local populations against you. That doesn't help Turkey. That hurts Turkey. I say that when we're trying to help America. Don't go in a counterproductive direction. It seems like criticism to people who are not used to it, but it's actually trying to help, okay? Now, they explain again in the New York Times here, Turkey's been fighting a counterinsurgency campaign against the Kurdistan Workers' Party since the group ended a 2-year ceasefire in July. Analysts said the renewed conflict initially appeared to have been a calculated political strategy by President Erdogan to strengthen support for his Justice and Development Party ahead of parliamentary elections in November. That to me is deeply disturbing. I agree with those analysts. A Kurdish party, not PKK, that's the terrorist group, a perfectly legitimate Kurdish party, won a lot of votes in the Turkish parliament. They have every right in the world to participate in democracy. They are equal citizens in Turkey. They did participate. They won a lot of seats. That prevented Erdogan's party from getting in control of parliament in a way that they could change the constitution to give Erdogan more power. Erdogan didn't like that. And lo and behold, we had established in terms of Turkey some degree of peace with the PKK and certainly with Kurdish civilians. And all of a sudden that peace was uprooted and for a political purpose. So if you're of the mind that, oh, who cares, they're all terrorists, I don't believe that any civilians are killed. First of all, you're blinded by your identity if you think that. But if you're going in that direction, you should care at a minimum about Turkish soldiers, right? At least 200 members of Turkey's security forces have been killed since the conflict resumed. So, did those soldiers have to die? Well, if Erdogan didn't want more seats in the parliament and he didn't go in and reignite these matters, those soldiers didn't have to die either. We didn't have to go down this road. Is he solely responsible? No, the PKK is also responsible. But this whole story feels like we're talking about many other countries. I've done this story for like in the case of Israel, for example, right? Netanyahu's poll numbers go sky high when he attacks Gaza. He kills civilians. People throughout the world are outraged at Israel. Don't do that. They are right to be outraged. Now, in this case, Turkey, for their own political reasons, Erdogan's party in this case, goes and attacks civilians. People should be equally outraged. Don't do that. That's not the right thing to do, especially for your political gain. Now, if you're unclear about the politics of it, let me be clear on this. First of all, before we get to one more piece on the politics, let me give you what a local teacher, Nurettin Kurtay, said. He said, "The tanks fire all day and we have nowhere left to hide. People are dying in their own homes. Our schools and our infrastructure has been destroyed. There is no difference between what is going on here and next door in Iraq and Syria." Well, Assad has also fired on his own people and also fired in buildings, homes, and schools. So if you're going to criticize him, okay, well, you have to be consistent. Again, Netanyahu's right-wing government in Israel has fired into schools, homes, and I know a lot of people in the Middle East who are outraged at what Netanyahu did, and you are right. You should be outraged by that. But when Erdogan does something very similar and fires into these civilian areas, hitting schools, buildings, you should be equally outraged. Now, back to the politics. Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, who's in the same party as Erdogan, who's the president, has labeled the Pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, or HDP, an extension of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, and refuses to hold talks with its leaders until they prove themselves, quote, a serious and genuine political party. Well, isn't that convenient? They were preventing you from some of your political objectives. This is a perfectly legitimate political party in a democracy, and you said, nah, just because you're Kurdish, I think you're with the terrorists. So you're not a legitimate political party anymore. Well, you can't do that. Well, you can, but then you can't really call yourself a democracy after that. So there's no evidence of that. And Erdogan and his party have constantly labeled journalists who are against them as terrorists. Anyone who's opposed to them is, conveniently enough, a terrorist. So the right-wingers in America, the Cheneys and the Bushes, get more popular through war, but they do great damage to America. Same thing with the right-wingers in Israel. Yes, they get more popular, but they do great damage to Israel because they delay peace. They create a vicious cycle of violence that hurts everybody. The right-wingers in Turkey create a vicious cycle of violence that hurts everybody. They do great damage, not just to the Kurds in the area, but to all of Turkey. And Engin Gür, who ran away from this area, now a lot of the Kurds are running away, and there's more Kurds in Istanbul, which is the cosmopolitan city on the other side of Turkey, than there is even in the eastern provinces. And when you run there, there's no fighting there, and so it's relatively peaceful. And he explains what people here in the West, that's Istanbul, what people here in the West do not realize is that we are one step away from a civil war. So that's why this is the hidden war. And here's what's not going to be good for Turkey, the region, or the world. a civil war in Turkey. Right-wingers across the world, they think they benefit politically from this cycle of violence, but it does great damage to all the rest of us. We got to wake up to it, realize it, so we know what to counter.